Hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging SoonerCon. The longest running pop culture con in Oklahoma has a new look, a new mascot, and a fantastic guest list. Join us in Norman, Oklahoma, June 30th through July 2nd, 2023, and meet celebrities such as Billy West, John Scalzi, Erica Harlicker, and John Swayze. Visit SoonerCon.com to reserve your membership.
On tap today, we have Philip Murphy. How you doing this evening?
I'm good, and how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk to you. My audience is mostly going to know you from your work on Lower Decks, but you have an extensive resume of design work that I really would like to talk about. So,
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I'm work on Lower Decks. I've worked on a few other shows and comics. So where you want to start, feel free to shoot me any questions. Yeah.
I think I can't help but be curious about your work with the Star Trek Transformer crossover. That is such a
Yeah.
fun idea, and people like you and I are not going to be able to resist talking about that. So why don't we just go ahead and start there?
Sure. What would you like to know?
Well, first of all, when it came to putting together the mishmash of the Enterprise and the Transformer form, how did that start? How did you tackle that?
Well, we knew going in that we wanted to fit everything inside the animated series universe. So we couldn't really have super detailed Transformers off the bat because they would stand out. So we went through, we said G1 would probably be the best version of the Transformers to go with. And then the story progressed. As the story went on, we found out that the Enterprise would transform from Fortress Maximus into Fortress Tiberius. So we had to start at Fortress Maximus and figure out how he would transform into the Enterprise. So we went through a few designs and we settled on what you see in the comics. We tried to dial back the detail a lot to make it fit the animated series Enterprise, and it was a few designs went through, but I think it got there in the end.
The animated series, and I love it, by the way. So
Yeah,
you're talking to a fan here, but I mean, we had the case of we had the inflatable Enterprise decoy, and
yeah.
we had ideas like that. So I'm guessing that when it comes to making a transformer out of the Enterprise, you're not super worried about the engineering aspects of how it's going to actually function.
No, because even when you go back to the original G1 Transformers, they didn't really look like the toys that were transforming. So you could have had a little leeway there when we decided. So we put the cells on the back, and the legs kind of transformed out of the center piece of the other. So we kind of fiddle around with how it would look, and I think it works for what it is. Like,
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's a really good point that you're making there. If you're talking about, cars and trucks, especially that first generation of Transformers that would flip around,
yeah.
they couldn't actually be functional as vehicles, even if you could make them do this transformation there. That's you just kind of believe it as for the logic of what it is.
Yeah. You have to kind of suspension of disbelief when you go into the Transformers universe, because
Yeah.
again, how could a giant transformer turn into a little tiny radio? So
Mhm.
even then, a suspension of disbelief is needed in that universe.
And you have to just immediately think of scale being something that's not going to factor in here because they seem to grow and shrink at the convenience of the plot.
Yeah. Even in the old G1 series, there you couldn't really judge by the size of anything because sometimes they're the size of buildings, the next time they're the size of normal humans.
But the thing is, it's fun. It's really fun,
Yeah,
and the crossover that you put together, it is just a lot of fun in general.
yeah. We try to have as much fun as possible going into it.
And I think that's something we don't get enough of now, especially there's a certain segment of the Trek fandom that is just not understanding that we want to have fun first and foremost when we go into these things.
Yeah. It's a Star Trek is very It can be fun. There's a lot of fun episodes of Star Trek. Yeah, Lower Decks especially. It's hard to do comedy with Lower Decks that in Star Trek.
Part of what makes it work though is the look of it, and you're designing props for Lower Decks,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the show being so visual, and it really, even though it's not really high on detail, it's high on story detail. You cram a lot of factoids and references in there, and that's a tough ask for, a show that has a history going back over 50 years at this point.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely Lower Decks is definitely a love letter to the fans. All right, it's trying to get as much as the history of Star Trek in as possible into a half an hour format. So along with the story that's being told, so we try the best fish stuff that the fans will recognize and that newcomers will say, hey, look at that, I might go back and see where that actually episode that came from and check it out.
And in a way, I think that's a way of a lot of us came into it, that we would grow up, we would watch maybe the original series or Next Gen or DS9 or whatever was kind of on when we found the show, and there's all these references in there that we have to go back and say, oh, well, where did this come from? Does this mean something? Can I look at that? And now Lower Decks is just one of those cases where there's so much to cram in there. Almost every line is a wink or a nod somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a lot easier now because, as I said, growing up, all the references might have been, you might have only noticed them years later through reruns, or the books that came out through the years that said, "Oh, this happened in this episode, and this happened in that episode." Now everything's at your basically at hand's tuck, so you can. Oh, that happened in that episode. I'll go back and look at that episode to see what bigger meaning that has.
And it's something that comic book fans especially are going to be, they're going to recognize that process, because that comics have a history. They invented the idea of just saying, okay, here's a reference here, here's a footnote. They love footnotes in comics, and I think
Yeah,
TV
yeah.
is one of those things that we just hadn't got their heads around that just yet.
Yeah, as I said, the editor's note down the corner said, "Oh, this happened in this episode. Go back and look at it." So, Easter eggs is really fun trying to get those in any show. So when the fans see it, it's always a good reward with hearing their, "Oh, I see that, I remember the episode, and this happened in this episode." So it's always fun to see that.
What kind of Easter eggs are you thinking of that you might have been able to slip in, or at least that you might have put your 2 cents in?
I I I won't say anything yet because season 4 is just around the corner, and I don't want
Sure.
to, I don't want anything to slip. But
Yeah,
there
and
might be a few. I was like,
I'm not in the business of getting anybody in trouble, so no worries there.
no problem.
But I guess I would then ask, we're talking about, how much you love this kind of stuff. I'm guessing you have a pretty good appreciation for the history of animation and comics, because there's just, I see it in your work there. Is there something that inspired you or that you really enjoyed growing up? But we're talking about how things are changing, and I agree with you. You can't just stay stuck in the past. You got to just appreciate the present for whatever it is. But there's now this trend now to go in and revise and revisit, update shows that we used to like as kids. And hey, I'm all about that because I think it's great. But do you see any particular success stories that are out there?
Um, yeah, well, rebooting things is always going to be hard because you have to deal with two factions of kind of the original fans and the newcomers, and you have to kind of find a balance between those. Um, I think the best sh- property that's been doing that is the TMNT Truth, because there's been 5 or 6 versions of the TMNT Truth, and they've all been well received. I think that's been the best of that. Another one would have been, I like the Thundercats version that was out recently there. And there's been 2 of those. I think they're both very good. The 2011 version and the Thundercats Roar version. So again, 2 different styles for 2 different audiences. You don't have to have one version for one and then everyone enjoys it. You can have multiple versions and have something for everyone.
That's a really good call on that. Ninja Turtles has been revitalized many times, and they've recycled it and they put a new spin on it. And each one might not be for everybody, but each one found its audience. Nobody said this is totally pure trash. Nobody likes it. I think that there's something to that.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's always going to be hard because sometimes the fans want the original property to grow up with them, but then you're kind of cutting out the new kids that are coming in that want to look at it and mightn't be able to because it's more of an adult version. It's always nice to have a multiple version of something. Like even Lower Decks, that can be viewed by everyone, um, newcomers, fans of the original series. They'll all find something they like in it.
Sure. And Lower Decks, I do actually recommend it for newcomers, even though there's so many jokes they're not going to get. It's so much fun to watch the story play out that I don't think you would mind that. And, I come into it as a long-time fan, so it's hard for me to say that authoritatively, but I really just think that it's a genuinely funny show. And there are so many shows that don't make you laugh the way Lower Decks makes you laugh.
Yeah, it's an incredibly funny show. It's well written. It's well written, and it actually feels like it takes place in the Star Trek universe
Mhm.
as a more comedy version. Yeah. So as I said, newer people would see it and then go back and say, "Oh, I might like TNG or Voyager," and then they might go back and look at TOS and the original animation series, which is always good. Yeah, yeah, it's always when they go back and watch it, like the Lower Decks might have as I said earlier on, a little Easter egg in there that might say, "Oh, this happened in the episode of the animated series," and they go back and look and they become a fan of that. So that's always good when they go back and find things that they mightn't have liked before and they'd enjoy now.
Yeah.
Which I think the animated series is actually getting in a whole new audience now, which is always good.
Yeah, and it deserves it for sure. There's been so many people who have glossed over it because either they weren't able to watch it or they just assumed it would be silly. And I think, not there's not much of it out there, but it's worth a look for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't even watch the anime series until late life because it wasn't really shown over here. It was only on reruns that I was able to see it. So, and I enjoyed it because I was a big fan of the Filmation and the Hanna-Barbera series that were out at the time, and it was very much in the vein of that.
It was actually my introduction to the franchise, so I have a certain soft spot for it.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though I knew it wasn't the original show, I knew there's something else that I wasn't supposed to be seeing. It appealed to me right at that, and I was a little kid, so it just made me say, I'm going to find more, and that's what I think all the shows do in some way.
Yeah, yeah, and for the longest time, it wasn't even considered canon. But I think going back, even just looking at it outside from, it actually has some really good written episodes that would actually fit in to the original series very well.
Agreed, for sure. It's not even the visuals that are the problem. It's the
Yeah,
length of the episodes. It's the fact that you have a 25-minute episode when every other show was 50 minutes prior to that. They feel shorter.
yeah, yeah,
It's
and they have to cut a lot of the excess out of it, and it's harder to shove a 45 to 50 minute episode into half an hour. So I think they did a really good job in those animation series that they're able to do that.
Yeah. Given that limitation, they recover for it very well. But when your frame of reference is a 50-minute episode, and then we didn't have half-hour episodes again until Short Treks came along, and then Lower Decks. So
Yeah, yeah,
it was the
yeah,
oddball for a while.
yeah, yeah. And as the format, Star Trek always lends itself well to animation, I think, because you can do a lot more in animation than you can do in live action, because you could have bigger ships, bigger aliens, bigger stories, and I think it translate very well into animation.
It does. The fact that there are, like you said, some things you just can't do. And the fact that we had immediately put in the characters of RX and Murex, which were characters that they wouldn't have been able to do with the technology of the time and probably wouldn't have been able to do until many years later anyway. Animation made it happen.
Yeah, yeah. Even now, something like Eric's on screen would be a lot of budget for that one character in
Mhm.
every episode of a show. They might be out pulled off now with the technology that's there, but back then it would have been completely out of the question unless it would have been totally puppets and special effects. And even at the height of Star Trek, I don't think it could have pulled off that even at the movie level for
No,
a character to be fully on screen constantly.
sure. I mean, the best they got, there was a background character who was a Acacian, and they had the cat person makeup, and that character was only on screen for a very just a few minutes, I think, or even a few seconds. It was like they just managed to make it work, and they got them off screen right away. And that was, like you
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
for a movie.
yeah. I think even in Discovery, I think the Saru, the makeup effects are just phenomenal on that. But again, it's a human inside. If you have something going around on like all fours with a longer neck and something that would eat up a lot of the budget per episode. So again, animation is probably the best place to find all those extreme alien designs.
And the making the giant Spock, and
Yeah.
the episodes where they take them to another universe. I mean, that's all that stuff animation made possible. And I mourn the fact that it didn't happen again until much later. I think that having an animated series in the 90s or early 2000s would have been a lot of fun too.
Yeah. I think Star Trek, it's always going to have that kind of fan base that wants the live action, constant like. But I think animation is the future of what the series can be. Even it can go on for years and years if it just have the live action and an animated series alongside each other would be great. Like,
I'll also toss this out there, and this is something that some people might not be considering as much, but we have a lot of the characters from the first few series are now not spring chickens anymore. Let's be honest. They're either retired or deciding they don't want to be active in the roles, or they might not feel that they can, sell the role the way they could earlier. This gives them the opportunity to show the character in a different light. And they don't have to put on the makeup. They don't have to be on the set. They can just do a voice and contribute that way, and that they can revisit the character if they choose to through animation.
exactly, yeah. Even there could be even in kind of untold stories of like Captain Picard's journeys or even Captain Kirk or Spock's journeys. They could all be told through animation.
Mhm.
Flashbacks or so, as I said, short tracks are great for that. Even in Lower Decks, the guest characters are coming in. Like we had George Takeda, and which is great seeing.
Yeah, it's not just trying to make different effects. Sometimes just making it the process more accessible for an actor who is just deciding that they don't want to put a whole lot of time into it, but still wants to give it a shot. Hey, these are the chance to get a new Kirk story, a new Sulu story, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's and it's great. Even having newcomers come in and seeing all that. I said that you have to. The fan base isn't getting any younger, so having newcomers come in and enjoy through the anime, even Prodigy, bringing a whole new generation of kids. Like so,
Mhm.
it's all new Trek fans are great. Like
Yeah, Prodigy hit it out of the park as far
yeah,
as making something that is totally new, totally fresh, but still rooted in the original lore. And I mean, you can know absolutely nothing, you can know absolutely everything, and Prodigy is going to be able to tell you a story. And I think that's its a win.
yeah. I think even more episodes or more series like that set in the Star Trek universe, where it doesn't have to be focused entirely on the Starfleet or the Klingons or just a crew off on their own discovering the universe and what Star Trek is really about. That would be great. Like,
Agreed. We as fans know enough that I think we can stretch beyond the original model of, well, we have the crew on the bridge on the ship, this is the mission. Like, yeah, but there's so many other people out there. Like now we just grab this batch of teenagers who found a ship and they're trying to just make their way in the universe. I mean, that's a good story. It doesn't have to be the same cookie cutter military plot. I don't want to say cookie cutter in a bad way, but the first six shows kind of had the same basic framework.
Yeah, yeah. Even the lower decks, it's not really the best of the best. Kind of on the bridge or going out into the best missions. Or it's just like the guys doing the everyday jobs that needs to be done in the background and focusing on those and having seen their adventures, which is always great too. Even the original series, those episodes that were in TNG, the lower decks episodes, it was
Mhm.
always great to see what happens not on the main bridge crew or any of the side characters, just the guys down in the bottom of the decks getting the job done.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was definitely a Gene-ism, is that you want to show the best of the best, and you have your utopia, and we understand that's what it was going for, but it's important to show people what will be like for anybody in the future, not necessarily the best of the best, because if you don't see yourself as the best of the best, you still want to see yourself on the screen.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Again, the original series had a very I won't say militaristic approach. It was kind of just like the Starfleet itself, kind of going out as explorers. But there's also other things you could tell a story about how Ferengi merchant out, trying to con people out of their savings, or kind of one story I would like to see is the rise of the Klingon Empire with Kahless, and I think that would be a great story. Kind of think about just Game of Thrones in space. That would be a
Yes,
great show to see.
that would be a lot of fun. That would be a heck of a
Yeah,
lot of fun. I, I mean, I would definitely want to see a Tal Shiar story,
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. We
Sorry.
hear about them, but we never really get a chance to see them in action. And that's a Romulan thing in general, is that we didn't really get a chance to see the Romulans much, because we never had the right story. And I think that would be a good one.
Yeah, yeah. TNG, they're very much the enemy. It wasn't until later, through the movies and the Picard series, that you could see the Romulans as kind of a people in itself.
Hmm.
But as and then Cardassian Obsidian Order, and of course there's the new Section 31 series or movie. What they're doing with that'll be cool to see. 'Cause all these little kind of, they're not main Starfleet, or they're not main kind of Klingons, or like just kind of off to the side stories in the Star Trek universe that could be told.
Hmm. So I love the fact that you're a fan and you're getting into this and you're just having fun with it. And I'm thinking there's probably somebody listening now that is thinking what you're doing is so flippin' cool, because I think it's so flippin' cool. Um, if somebody's wanting to follow in your footsteps, if they have an interest in this, what would you suggest they do for themselves?
uh, Keep trying. It's the best advice I could give anyone, really. Keep it. Anything you see, if you see any job postings for any shows or anything, put your portfolio forward. It can't hurt to get your work out there. Kind of build it up. Depending on what position you're going for, it's always great to cater your portfolio towards that, or even have separate portfolios for anything you're going for. Like if it's for this type of show, it's probably better to have a portfolio filled with that. And always great to kind of work with the people around you, kind of get advice off them, see what you can learn. And that's basically what I did. Again, I say there's a lot of luck involved in it too. You have to be in the right place at the right time, kind of when things are going. You need to be ready for that, and that's basically it. I suppose.
That's good advice for sure. So what are you working on in the future? Is there something we can see from you aside from the upcoming lower decks, which mum's the word on that? Anything else you have brewing?
Oh, right now you can catch Animaniacs. That's been released earlier this year along with Super Turbo Storytime. If you like anything about cars and crazy stories about how the cars came to be, that's great. And
Okay.
later this year, as I said, Lower Decks is coming out, and of course you have the Venture Brothers movie that's coming out too. And I'm working on a show now. It's going to come out soon. It's The Hospital from Amazon. It's another sci-fi show about a hospital. So I think any fans of Lower Decks will like that.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to put that in the show notes on my website, aaronvossig.com. Where can people follow you and your ventures on the web?
Best place to find me is on Twitter at CrashTesterX, and I'm always talking about Star Trek. So if you have any, if you like interact with people talking about Star Trek, that's the best place to be, or to find me.
Your account is great. You post a lot of fun stuff, and I strongly recommend anybody who just even has a slight interest in Trek to give you a follow.
That's great. I'm always happy to interact with other Trek fans and discuss Trek.
Awesome. Well, Phil, thank you so much for being here. I'd be glad to have you back anytime.
Thanks very much. I'll be happy to come back anytime. Thanks for having me.